Hello everyone. Today I will be speaking about cowboys in German Western films and how Paris, Texas uses the US West to be a commentary on Wenders' German and emerging American identity. Yeah, okay, so it might seem like a leap, but please hear me out. When you follow along with the history of German-made Westerns, or Indianerfilme, it turns out to make quite a bit of sense. To begin, it's important to note that Westerns have been popularized in Germany for more than a century. They even have a word for their love of the genre, Ostalgie, or nostalgia for the West. This fascination began all the way back with Karl May, a German writer who released many adventure novels at the turn of the late 1800s to early 1900s. He wrote his adventure novels about a variety of places, with his Wild West novels being some of his most popular. His novels' popularities skyrocketed. His success in Germany and neighboring countries is comparable to the success of J.K. Rowling with Harry Potter in terms of how many novels were sold. All of this is ironic considering the man never once traveled west of New England in his entire life. With this, Indianerfilme had their start in Germany. The genre had its initial success around this time, but it was elevated to a new level post-World War II in the 1960s. Germany was separated into East and West Germany, with the people picking up the carnage of their nation. But what were these films really about, and how does this connect to German history? At first, with Karl May's novels, it was about the simplicity of the good guy versus bad guy. Westerns, regardless of country of origin, have a good, clear-cut heroes and villains, albeit whether the cowboys play the heroes or the villains generally differs. With the story of Winnetou, it's set the trend of the Native Americans playing the heroes, as opposed to the savage villains as seen in their American counterparts. Often, the protagonist is a Native American chief who plays by a strict moral code of laws and in respect to their elders, as opposed to a lawless cowboy who decides their own definitions of right or wrong. These Indianerfilme really displayed the growing support for socialism in the country. Many of these films show the protagonists caring for weaker community members and shows of strength through their duty to their community. It was more about the community than lonesome shows of strength. Once again, completely opposite of the role of the heroes in the US Westerns. For the most part, the ideological foundations of the film were mostly identical on both sides of the Berlin Wall. There were a few minor differences, such as the appeal to free-roaming people that catered well to the East, and the role nativism played in West German alternative culture at the time. Yet, all the same, the primary core foundations of the film's messages interested West and East Germans alike. Gerd Gmunden, a German professor at Dartmouth, even wrote in his novel on film history that their ideological goal was to articulate an outspoken critique of the colonialism and racism that fueled the westward expansion of the United States. Thinking back on the history of the nations, it makes quite a bit of sense. The Germans could see parallels between the Native Americans and cowboys, and to themselves and who they interacted with. The oppressive cowboy was their past, and the Native Americans were their hopeful future. Meanwhile, in other ways, they were the natives and the Americans played the disregarding cowboys with their encroaching attempts at imperialistic influence post-World War II. The movies helped the Germans make sense of their country's ever-changing landscape, regardless of borders, and helped shape a new cultural identity. This movement also created unified cultural icons that wouldn't exist without this newfound cultural identity. Cultural values were solidified in this movement, and thus cultural role models were created. Gottko Mitic, a Yugoslavian actor who gained popularity for his various roles as Native American chiefs, became a symbol of German values and of the reunification of the East and West. In many ways, he became the German concept of the ideal man, and by many was called unsere Gottko. Wim Wenders, the director of Paris, Texas, even says in an interview, "In my own mind, for me, the American West does not belong only to America." Now, initially, whenever I heard this first quote, I saw a strange double meaning to it. I knew that Wender, intended for it to show how Germans also care for the American West, like it's part of them. I mean, really, there are armies worth of cowboy reenactors in Germany. Look it up. There's a lot. Yet, at the same time, I initially thought that quote could be exactly what someone native would say in a kind of context where their culture is connected to the land. However, after more research, it brings me to the point of how modern German culture, albeit in a more indirect way, is also connected to the West. Indianerfilme displays concepts central to the German identity and also their history, and how its films conveyed unification of two Germanys. Knowing all of this, it leads us to the time that Paris, Texas was released in 1984, just 3 years after the Berlin Wall fell. With Wenders being German himself, it is impossible to separate Paris, Texas from German cultural history of the Indianerfilme genre. I read Paris, Texas as almost a love letter from Wenders to his German identity, blending with his emerging American one. The film itself blends elements of what is so iconically Indianerfilme with what is so rawly American. The opening shots are American to the core. Generally, how isolation is shown differs whether the film director is American or not. American films tend to show the isolation through space, like through open space, while European films tend to show it through aging and decay. Therefore, it is established early on that Travis equates to a more American cowboy as opposed to a European one. Walt, however, who is Travis's brother, is a different story. Walt is much more involved in the community around him. He has a wife and he takes care of his nephew, who is Travis's son. He works a social job and he has a sense of moral duty to look after his brother and his nephew and his community. He is evidently not a fit for the American cowboy loner role. Travis and Walt both represent what it means to be a hero in Western films, while differing in the type of Westerns. Ultimately, of course, the film follows Travis for the entire duration, ending with Travis driving off into the dead of night with his child in the care of his past lover. We don't really see an end for Walt, though. He no longer has the child he raised, and he doesn't have his brother back either. His moral code sort of led to the collapse of his life. The things that made each of them heroes to their respective symbolic countries led to their individual downfalls, even if it isn't an entire fall from grace. Travis begins alone, ends alone, and wrecks his family. Walt, who tries to make the peace, loses his nephew to his brother due to moral obligation to let Travis take his son back, even though he has shown no interest in him in the past. I think part of the film was to show the flaws in both capitalist and socialist hero archetypes, that neither is perfect. There are many aspects within the film that are so inherently American, that show Wenders' emerging American identity, which contrasts greatly with the German aspects of the film. The conflicts of socialist versus capitalist in Western films is so iconically German, and shows new German values. This film shows the conflict of that which is American in a German world. Arguably, it could represent the cultural shock of Americanisms to Wender. Paris, Texas tells the story of German identity mixing with American life through the use of the depiction of the American West.